All right, so here we go. We're learning every day. At this point, it is my distinct honor and privilege to do our first introduction. And we know who is going to be doing the evaluation of Jack's speech. That's Peggy, right? Perfect. So we've been planning for today's open house for a number of weeks. During that time, we considered who might be our Toastmaster speakers for today. The consensus was that Jack Blackburn should be one of them. You might be asking, what is it that made us choose Jack? Well, a couple of things come to mind. Number one, Jack always brings something for us, the listeners. Something we can use or something encouraging and obviously laughter. However, 20 minutes after this meeting is over, you're not going to remember a thing that Jack said. What you're likely to take with you, though, is how you feel. Because you choose to spend the time with us, Heart of Eau Claire Toastmasters. Jack is our feel-good ambassador. Please sit back and enjoy. So this is the story of Jack's life, a fictional tale of his own fabrication. The title is, Wow! I'm just glad to be alive. Jack Blackburn.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, honored guests, my attire today has been carefully chosen for at least two purposes. One, I'm a member of the Witness Protection Group, and this getup is my pathetic attempt at concealing my identity. The second thing is, I want you somehow to go with me in your mind to the Great Plains of eastern Colorado in the 1950s. My family and I grew wheat on giant fields on the Great Plains. We also grew Hereford cattle, primarily Hereford bulls. Now, Herefords have horns, and horns are a danger and a real disadvantage, not only to the ranchers, but to the cattle themselves, particularly in the confined area of a stockyard. Some people dehorn their cattle, but what we found is that there are naturally occurring hornless Herefords. These are also known as white-faced cattle. You may be familiar with them. What we did then is we began to specialize in this hornless variety of polled Herefords, and we did this by building a herd of polled Hereford bulls. The herd began to grow, and after a while we began to sell these bulls to the neighboring ranchers. Then, as it grew more and more, we began to involve ourselves in interstate transportation of male bovines. We shipped bulls to Chicago. We shipped bulls to Omaha. We shipped bulls to Kansas City. In no time at all, we became the biggest bull shippers west of the Mississippi. Now, I would like to take you to the daily life of a young man growing up on the eastern part of Colorado in the 1950s. My childhood happened to coincide with the era of the outhouse. My experience was limited to the type that had 2 holes. Many times I went down that path in all sorts of conditions. When you had to go, you had to go. And I learned during nighttime runs that you had to put the flashlight down on the correct side of you or you lost it. During those days, I was a keen observer and I had many questions. Mama, I noticed that when you go to the toilet, you leave the door open just a little bit. Why is that? Well, it lets in a little more light and what, Mama? Well, while you're sitting on one hole, if there's something down there and it comes up through the other hole, it can get out the door and you won't be trapped in there with it. Wow, Mama, did anything like that ever happen to you? Yes. Once. It was winter, it was cold, and I had stayed in the bed too long. The last minute, I knew I had to go, and I hurried down the path, and I plopped down as fast as I could, and then it exploded up through the other hole. It brushed past me, went out the door. What was it, Mama? I never knew. I jumped to my feet. I yelled. I lost the flashlight. And I was faced with the decision of a lifetime. Do I sit back down on that hole? What if there's another one down there? Moments later, I was back in my bed. And as I drifted off to sleep, I said, wow, I'm just glad to be alive. Another incident that I'll offer in concluding here is the concept of hawker spitting. Hawker spitting is accomplished by hacking up mucus from the back of your throat and then propelling it rapidly out through pursed lips. I want to tell you, in the heady atmosphere of teenage guys in 1950s muscle cars, hawker spitting was a big shot thing to do. And this was never more important and illustrated than the time I got to ride to town with my friend Bobby. Bobby's dad had torn his tractor apart, and all the pieces were scattered carefully around, placed in parts and areas on the Quonset hut floor so we could put it back together again. And we were going into town to buy the repair parts to put it back together. We made it to town. We picked up the repair parts, and Bobby was sitting at the light waiting for it to turn green. So he had the wheel in his hand, and without explanation and without reason, he went, poof, up and he looked straight ahead again. About that time, a car rolled in our left. 1959 Ford Galaxy, 2-door, red and white. Big, broad, white seat on the front could easily seat 4 adults. But nestled very close to the driver was the most beautiful girl I'd ever seen. Blonde hair, ponytail, peaches and cream complexion. The hawker was already in the air when the Ford rolled in. Through the open window, across the wide expanse of that front seat, right on her cheek. She was hyperventilating and trying to scream at the same time. Her male companion looked at her and said, "What is the matter with you?" He never moved his head as he shifted his gaze from the hawker quivering on her cheek to me. At that instant, the light turned green. Bobby punched the throttle on that 59 GTO. And a moment later, he popped the clutch, grabbed second. The thrust of that big 389 pinned my head and shoulders to the seat. As soon as I could kind of get my head around, look out the back window, the Ford was rolling to a stop in the middle of the street. Smoke was pouring out from under the wheel wells and under the hood. In a failed attempt to catch us, he had blown his engine. Well, we rolled leisurely on out to the edge of town, turned east on Colorado Highway 61, headed for the ranch, the bulls, and the wheat fields. I turned to Bobby and said, "Man, I'm just glad to be alive, Mr. Toastmaster."